Hello, I'm Derek John Johnson, Derek's Master Name Dance Fem. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about cultural cult. What I like to call cultural cults. And I do need to preface this by saying I'm in no way a cult expert. I'm just somebody with opinions and a fascination who has experienced these type of cults firsthand. Basically, cultural cults are cultural movements or, subsets which tend to have very cult like mindsets. It's a core system of beliefs, sometimes branching out into different areas with the same core beliefs, but different, you know, beliefs branching out into those. And that uses cult like, and where the movements use cult like tactics on each other. These type of cults usually tend to not have leaders, though there are figureheads which will sometimes act as de facto, leaders or de facto advertise advisors is the best word I can think of right now to say for others in the movement. A good example of this would be like Stefan Molyneux for the anti-SJW and alt-right cults, or John Hagee for the evangelical cult. Telltale, who is a lot more adept and knows a lot more about this stuff than me, has created something called the Extremism Gradient, I believe is the name, that actually does go pretty well in depth and actually does a pretty good job at explaining some of this. Where basically what I call cultural cults would be level 1 cults by him. Now, the reason I consider these cults is because, well, they basically act like cults. And yeah, it's usually the followers who are who are basically delving themselves into further and further into extremism. However, that still doesn't change the damage done by it to not only the person being radicalized, but to the targets they go after. It's also important to remember that these usually do target people who are also in low places, much like traditional cults would. And to be fair, they don't always follow like everything on the bite model. They'll usually follow like a few separate areas, but be less extreme in many of the other, or not extreme at all in many or any of the others. However, they do still serve the same function. It's important to remember. Again, it can be hard to be on the watch out for these and not fall into, one. The reason I would consider evangelicalism a cultural cult is because, well, it's basically a cult. It follows a lot of the same, standards as a cult. It falls into the behavioral information and thought control, emotional controls, and even kind of the thought controls of the bite model pretty much perfectly in a lot of areas. I even read a Vice article where they did talk about how evangelical churches use a lot of these same psychological manipulation tactics that traditional cults do. Yeah, and it just happens to lack a leader, even though there are figureheads in the movement. But it is also important to remember that people can be deprogrammed from these type of cults, and since there's usually no power structure, they usually tend to have maybe like 1 or 2 years in the of being big in the mainstream, then kind of, fizzling out. Yes, they might still remain after that, they just won't be as popular or as big as they once were. And yes, these kind of cults can be either right wing or left wing. A good example of the left wing cultural cults would be, in my humble opinion, the TERFs, or, vote blue no matter who, since they do tend to follow a lot of the what I would call standards of a cultural cult. Well, that's the video for today. Bye.